I'm Joanne McMeeking. I'm Head of Improving Care Experiences at CELCIS, the Centre for Excellence, based at the University of Strathclyde, and I'm also Chair of the SIRCC Committee. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks, Joanne. Everyone, my name's John Ryan. I'm an Assistant Director at Aberlour Childcare Trust, and I've been part of the SIRCC Conference Planning Committee since 2014. I'm also the chair of Social Work Scotland's residential childcare subgroup, so I've got a real interest in what we've been exploring over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. So can I tell you a little bit about the moments that I've had over the last 2 weeks and share a little bit about that with you? And John and I are going to sort of talk together, hopefully in quite a relaxed way, and we're going to challenge each other with some questions as well about how we move this work forward and how we make this even better for children and young people in Scotland. I think what's been most striking for me over the last 2 weeks has been the really small moments that have made a difference for children and young people. And I was part of the webinar last week, and Rosie Moore was at that, and she talked about rainbows, and she talked about the small acts of kindness and the importance of being yourself and being authentic with your children and young people. That really, really matters. Those real moment by moment interactions between children and their workers. And it might not be a significant penny drop moment for me, but it just goes back to when we feel this kind of sense of enormity about how we're going to change things, that things at times can feel quite overwhelming, that change needs to happen at such a grand scale, and where do you fit into that? That for me really focused the attention on what absolutely matters and how you have a significant level of influence in the relationships that you create with your children. And that was really significant for me. So I wonder, John, what was significant for you over the last 2 weeks?
Do you know, John, I suppose that the most significant thing that the last couple of weeks has reminded me of is just what you've mentioned there. It's the power of relationship, because that actually does make the extraordinary ordinary, and it really, really links to the power of everyday care, because without relationships there is no care. And I suppose that the conversations, the materials that have been around through SIRCC 2020 have just reminded me about the power of relationship, be it how the children and young people we're privileged to meet every single day across a whole array of residential childcare services in Scotland that includes schools, residential schools, secure care in there. But I suppose that we're reminded every single day about the importance of language. And you know, the webinar last week, and it touched on the webinar as well about recording, but the power of language and how we describe those people that we care and love. You know, just that reminder, that mirror that's been held up to us in the sector about referring to those children and young people as lack children. And I suppose that as somebody who's been around for a while, I'm just really, really curious, Joanne, as to what the barrier is and why do we still feel the need to continue to use this language that many of us so desire to leave behind. And it's really, really, it's powerful to hear the testimony again of those children and young people, or people with care experience, talk about their disappointment when they read their history that's pottered with gaps about the significant things that they would expect to see there, but sometimes it's populated and continues to be populated with minutiae that they see as trivial. So for example, you know, that I was hearing people in Aberdeen, and I'm really, really impressed with what they're doing there, but talking about they used to record, we went into waking the child at 9:15, 9:20, 9:25, thinking, why are we still doing that? So I'm just really, really curious, Joanne, about what it is that we can do, because we can't wait for someone to tell us to stop. This is something that we can do. And I think that SIRCC 2020 has really, really energised me and made me really, really determined to be part of the future that enables people just to take responsibility for making things happen. So that would be probably the most significant piece of learning, because that reminds me about the power of residential care. And obviously we have had conversations about the complexity of restraint and the Scottish Physical Restraint Action Group, that I'm really, really proud actually of CELCIS and SIRCC, and they've really, really grasped the nettle, going back over a couple of years, and it's really, really good to see that, that traction hasn't been lost on that, and you can see nationally where that conversation's going. So those would be the main things that have stood out for me over the last couple of weeks.
John, can I pick up on a few things around language? And I know that that's been part of the 2 weeks, been quite a significant part of the 2 weeks. And a reflection from me and a question to you is, you kind of raised a challenge of, we just can't wait. You know, we have to do things, it needs to stop. And what struck me was the use of language and professional comfort around language, and why we continue to use it. And I wonder if it's about our comfort and at times our anxiety about changing or challenging the use of acronyms or not feeling part of something.
So I think part of the real challenge, Joanne, is around fear, that sometimes people are scared that they're going to miss something that someone might deem to be important, and also wonder, in the shadow of the promise, we are at a really, really important time in Scotland. And I'd say, like, Joanne, you and I have been around social work and residential care now for a number of years, and I suppose that we're not waiting for the promise. We want to be in the midst of the promise and really, really champion and change through the promise. But I just really wonder, when we begin to think about records and what we can write and what we can't write, I think something that would really, really help us is a really, really powerful message, for example, from the Information Commissioner in Scotland, just busting myths. So I know, obviously, we work within the context of GDPR, and there I'm using an acronym, but sometimes that can tie people in knots about what to write and what not to write. And certainly in a number of organisations I'm aware of, you know, there is a bit of courage there in trying to make the narratives, and I suppose that's what the language, you know, that trying not to think about records as records, but records as the children's narratives when they're living with us, but to make them, I was going to say coherent, but again you get into that kind of that language, but to make sense, to give children an opportunity to make sense. And I do get challenged when I think about, you know, that hearing stories about people using initials. Now, initials become meaningless because from a GDPR point of view, if you use somebody's initials, you'd be as well putting a name in it. Sometimes records are so heavily professionalised that they become meaningless for children and young people. So I just wonder if somebody who's really, really powerful in Scotland, such as information commissioners, can come a wee bit closer to the sector and reassure us. So, for example, what do we redact? And it's really, really sad in the 21st year of SIRCC to hear about the implications of redaction and quite literally wiping out part of people's narratives. Relationships are at the heart of this. And what we write about children should always be driven by relationships. And we need to have
And
courage to challenge.
yeah, and also get the right help and the right skill and the knowledge and the right investment from people to make this better, and to bring alongside the workforce, because it's not easy to sit down and do that absolutely bang on. That takes time, it takes skill, it takes trust, it takes coaching, it takes training. That doesn't happen overnight. You know, I think back to some of the way that I was writing and recording way back early doors as a baby social worker. And I know if I got access to what I was writing about then, now, I would be wanting to change some of that. I would be seeing it through this lens of, what would the child want me to write? What would they want to know? What would they want to know about their family? It's an oral history for children, isn't it? Now, wherever or not a child chooses to go back and access that information, they might not, or they might, but you have to understand that you are creating a story, a life story for children, and you're filling the gaps in for them, and you're offering the facts as well. It's part of them. We all have that. We all have photo albums that we can go to and stories that our family tell us. No matter how our family's constructed, you know, you can go to someone, he can tell you what you were doing and what your trait was, and that you liked eating cheese, sitting in your high chair, and you would have cheese before you had anything else. And these stories are still told. My mum still tells these stories, and she's in her late 70s, that my love of cheese used to drive her up the wall. And I still have a love of cheese. But that is so powerful. And you know, you think about the promise, and the promise was really clear around stigma and language compounding stigma. Shaw was telling us that in 2007. The Shaw report was telling us that. This is really difficult for people who go back to understand their history. It can also be re-traumatizing. And even if you have the best possible recording and story within a file, and the child has been running alongside you, if they ask for that, they need support to understand what that means for them. So it might not be about re-traumatizing a young person or an adult who goes back to read. It's about just helping them fill in the gaps, because they're going to have loads and loads of questions.
But Joanne, I suppose that what SIRCC 2020 has reminded certainly me of, and hopefully those who have been part of the webinars, or people who are coming back to review materials, because I think that's one of the real gifts that SIRCC 2020 has given us, that there's a legacy of the work that we can come back and see. But actually, it's a reminder to give the people that we work with every day agency, real authentic agency, and the promise actually puts that front and centre. The promise has been driven through the vehicle of giving people agency, but in terms of what we write and how we write it, we need to always hold the people at the heart of, you know, when we're writing about them. And Louise Wallin's presentation last year again reminds us about the power of that. But what I love about Louise's input, and just a reminder of it, actually, she really challenges us to think about the authenticity of relationships as well, because one of the things that I took away from last year's presentation by Louise, and reminded myself as I was listening again, was that her disappointment, you know, that she thought people liked her. And that was really striking, actually, just to as she read her story through the eyes of other people and through the words of other people. I think she was left feeling devastated and traumatized in the way that you talk about, and disappointed, actually, that and maybe misled. And I think that the sector is better than that, Joanne. And I suppose as I was hearing you speaking there, that in one respect, this year's theme is, you know, making something that's quite extraordinary ordinary, and it's based on relationships. But I can never ever get away from what Jim Anglin talks about. He talks about residential care as not being rocket science. And when you say that to people, you know, we all nod and say, yeah, he's absolutely right. And then the next slide comes up and says it's far more complicated than that. And I suppose that what I like about that is it's not about the complexity, it's the respect that's afforded to the work that we all do every day, because, you know, that through the webinars, not only through the records, but through the exploration of the work on restraint, people come in the main to do their best. When you come into residential childcare, you want to change the world. You want to heal the hurt that these children have unfortunately experienced. And I think that drives people every day. And I suppose that this year's event, In the Shadow of the Promise, really gives us an opportunity for us to take the responsibility to make that happen. It's fantastic, Joanne, when you hear, you know, the really, really powerful input from Who Cares, the really, really powerful input from Aberdeen. Louise is, you know, we can take control of this. Nobody needs to tell us to start writing in a more respectful way, to start writing in a way that takes account of the relationships that we have with children, the relationships we have with each other. And sometimes those relationships give us agency and a space to write some of the challenging things, because life is life. You know, it's not about, and I don't think that the children and young people that we work with are expecting a Van Gogh painting of, you know, the absolute perfect painting. They understand that life isn't plain sailing for them. So, you know, my challenge to everybody who's watching this and everybody who's contributed is to take some responsibility to make change happen. You can do it, and we can all help do it together.
I was struck by a couple of things that you were saying there, John, around the responsibility that you have as a worker to do this stuff, and it's not going to magically appear. So we have in Scotland, we have had a significant independent care review with the voice of care experienced young people absolutely at the heart of that. But alongside the voice of practitioners, other aspects, you know, of the workforce, academics, evidence, it's all sitting there. And no one can argue with the promise. It's an absolutely cracking piece of work. And it's the realisation of the vision. And all of us have a job to do that. We can continually look to a team within the promise to deliver on the promise. They are there to facilitate, to offer a national overview, to drive a national agenda, to keep things tight so that you've not got lots of organisations racing off in lots of different directions. But it's all of us in the everyday that's going to make this happen. And Gordon was saying, Gordon Main from CELCIS, who's been hosting some of the webinars over the last 2 weeks, and he used the expression yesterday, the promised land. What's going to take us to the promised land? It ain't going to be us all waking up one morning and it's all going to be sorted. It's all of us doing those small bits and some big bits as well, and actually going out of our comfort zone too with other folk that we work with and other organisations that we work with. So the use of professional language, the use of jargon. If you're sitting in a meeting and you're hearing that, or you're reading something that maybe a social worker's written or someone in education has written, how do you go about nudging that and saying, I'm not sure this is working. I don't understand what you're saying. And if I don't understand what you're saying, that child's not going to understand what you're saying, or that parent's not going to understand what you're saying. I wonder, John, if we kind of move on a little bit to think a little bit about the restraint work and the discussion around restraint in Scotland and the work of the network, which came from the SIRCC conference. And you said earlier that real kind of challenge to go into a real difficult space, a real grey area where a lot of people in organisations and a lot of people at policy level have very, very strong views about what should happen around restraint. And I wonder if we spend a little bit of time moving in and around that, thinking a little bit deeply about that. But what I did want to say before we move on was a little bit about residential care over the last 2 weeks in residential schools. And we've talked for decades in Scotland about residential childcare being a Cinderella service. Now, I know that that has significantly moved on, and I do think there is always something sitting quietly in the background about, is residential childcare the right place for children to be? And that sits quietly, and at times I get this kind of strong sense of we need to really push back and challenge that more, about residential childcare can be the absolute right place, the right home for children, and the intensity of family can be incredibly overpowering. And that is the reason that residential school or residential care is preferred and chosen for that child in that moment. And that at times sits as a cloud over residential childcare.
Do you know, Joanne, that you referred to Tom Shaw report? When I think about residential care, you know, the SIRCC conference maybe 3 years ago, we invited Angus Skinner, if you remember, along. And I'm always struck by his report, Another Kind of Home, back in 1992, that spoke about the status of residential childcare. And actually, I suppose that there's a leadership challenge for us all who work around residential childcare. The only people who can help us claim our place is us. We are the people who will claim the place of residential childcare in the tapestry of services for Scotland. For me, I would be astonished if anyone who's in and around residential childcare would not want a child to be in their own family where that's safe to do so. And there I am saying where it's safe to do. We want children to live in their own family. And we want children to experience family life. Mm-hmm. That's a given, Joanne. And that's what one of the blessings, I would say, that the promise has given us. It's just a reminder about the importance of family. That doesn't mean to say that the end is nigh for residential childcare in Scotland. As you said really quite eloquently, not all children actually want or can manage living in a family setting. And I'm really, really proud, actually, when I look around the tapestry of residential care services in Scotland, about how people continue to show what good, loving care can look like. Because the children and young people will tell us and are telling us that. So I would always say that we should always look for children to be living in families. And where that can't happen, residential childcare should be seen not as a Cinderella service. Everything else has failed, but we can offer something positive with a view. Because I would want every child who have ever had the good fortune to meet in residential childcare to go on and lead a positive life where they've got their own children. And I know that might sound romantic, but that drives me. I want people to have a positive family experience. If they've not been able to do that, to help them heal from that so they can give others a positive family experience. I don't think that's beyond anyone's gift other than ours, Joanne, to help make that happen. So that needs to drive us every single day. And perhaps that is one of the challenges as we begin to explore some of the subtleties in terms of some of the reviews over the years that we think, oh, we're under threat here. I don't think we are. I think that what we've got now through the promise, and indeed through this event, and what I love about SIRCC, is it gives us, it's part of that kind of tapestry of helping us in the sector claim our professional identity. So we've got something in Scotland to be proud of. And what I do know is that I know from that there's been really a high number of views of the website. So, for example, 800 views of the website. The international, feel of this is people are looking into Scotland, Joanne, because we hear time and time again that what we've got in Scotland, it sometimes doesn't feel positive, but people are looking to us for leadership. So come on, people, let's do it. And also the events. What the beauty of this year's SIRCC 2020 is actually, I'm understanding that over the kind of 3 webinars, we've had 150 people attend those. That is remarkable. Remarkable that has happened. And that shows the willingness in Scotland at the moment for people who want to do better. And what I love about the webinars that I've seen actually is that amidst some of the disappointment and some of the challenges, I'm really proud that there's no blame attached, Joanne, and that is, to go back to the whole conversation around restraint, SIRCC 2018 created a space for us to move in to talk about something that's really challenging without any blame.
Yeah, it did. It did. And we built on that, didn't we, collectively in partnership with a whole host of people across Scotland about, at times, very polarised positions around restraint in Scotland. And if you think of holding safely, and then you think about the lull that happened around restraint in terms of kind of policy activity at a national level, and then it came back on the agenda in 2018, and I know there'll have been people working away behind the scenes way before then, and there was a real kind of drive coming through, particularly from the Commissioner as well at that point. And just to see where that is now, the challenge for us is where we take it next. So the bringing together of people and the understanding of what it looks like across Scotland has set the challenge for all of us, not just that group, but for all of us in Scotland to really think about what are our next steps here.
But John, I think that's what makes this really exciting. I was always going to quote, and just, for example, I'm thinking about the manifesto. If you think back, there's no time to lose. There is no time to lose, but the willingness is there, the science is there. And I suppose one of the things that strikes me, I can hear, if I can quote, like Jim Wallace from Aberlour, challenging certainly me within the context of what we're doing, with a question is, as we look back historically, what will we think about the fact that we've restrained some of the most vulnerable children and young people in our society as a means of care? That's a really challenging question. And what I love about the events through SIRCC 2020 and indeed the work since 2018, it's created a space. And do you know what, Joanne? We don't yet have an answer, but I think there's a determination to do something different, because in the main, people who work in residential childcare don't like restraining children.
No.
And the agency that we give and that we afford, understandably and correctly, those children and young people we're looking after, they tell us they don't like being restrained. They want to be physically comforted. They want that physical affection that they would get in a kind of whatever a normal relationship is. And that's really important. And I suppose that the work that's going on in the Scottish Physical Restraint Action Group is unpicking a lot of that complexity, but it's doing it safely without blame. And I'm really proud to have been part of that journey, and I'm really proud that SIRCC has, as you say, a lot of individuals, a lot of organisations have been working away in the background, but we've brought it together, Joanne. There's been, a way of bringing people together to share and to challenge each other, because I think if we just quite literally stop, people are going to feel paralysed by fear, but what else do we do? So we are moving into space to use science, to use relationships, to use our training, to use the sophisticated knowledge that we've got about what it takes to look after children well without needing to resort to restraint. I think is really, really challenging and interesting. And just as I'm thinking here, you spoke about residential childcare being a Cinderella service, that kind of concept of last resort. Sometimes I wonder when you think about something like restraint, people wonder, what else can I do? What else can I do when I've got a child in front of me who's so distressed that they don't know where to turn, they don't know how to respond? But what I love about the group is really, really begin to unpick and explore that. And it's challenging agencies, not just care providing agencies, but those who are involved in behaviour management systems to really, really think about how people are being led and how people are learning and understanding the complexity in one respect about human interaction, but to focus on the simplicity of the relationship, Joanne, because I think, to come back to Jim Anglin, while it is quite complex and complicated, sometimes it can be fairly simple. So relationship really, really matters, and that's coming out through the work of the Scottish Physical Restraint Action Group, and it'll be a feature of the webinar around restraint and the conversation that Gordon and Laura and the others had as well.
And what we're hearing here is the strength of relationships and the importance of co-regulation with children and doing that together. So that moment by moment that can actually diffuse a situation. And that isn't about blame by saying because it's escalated, because it's ended in a restraint, then somehow it's a failure. It's how you kind of come back from that, because as you said, that's distressing to the child and it's on the whole distressing to the worker. Yeah. So the co-regulation, the relationship, the trust, the ability to really kind of tune into the energy, and that is quite a skill, isn't it? It's quite a skill, and it takes a very, very rounded practitioner to step into that space with a level of confidence, understanding the science behind it, the theory behind it, the kind of sense of self, understanding their presence in the space, watching. It's a very, very powerful interaction in the moment. And a couple of years ago, we had June Lee, who spoke so eloquently about the moment by moment and the ability to actually just step it down and take it away and take it out of high stakes into low stakes for the worker and for the child. And that takes a lot of support. It takes a lot of support for the workforce, and probably takes us into the holding the hand of the workforce who hold the hand of the child. And that's a really lovely kind of segue and an acknowledgement that we've been speaking, I think, probably for about 15 to 20 minutes. I was saying earlier to John before we moved into filming that we are technically the Richard and Judy of residential childcare. We do not have a CE. We are in separate wee boxes, but we're doing a good job here, I think. And it might just be a wee nod for us, John, just to acknowledge that time's ticking. We could sit here all day musing, talking, asking each other questions. I wonder if we just think a little bit about summarising and using the last kind of few minutes to say some big thank yous to all of the people who have been working really hard behind the scenes within many organisations, including Aberlour, including ourselves, but a very, very special thanks to our partners who've been part of the webinars, who have contributed, who have spoke, and to the people who've kind of come along and joined in, and the fact that we've got a historical archive now of this work, which has been a real blessing in disguise for us, has to be acknowledged, so folk can just tap into it at any time. You're not sort of stuck in this kind of space of having to attend for 2 days. You just can go in and out and use it, and it's been free, and I think that's been very, very important for people at a time that hasn't always been the easiest. And I don't want to dwell on that, but I just want to acknowledge that as well. So we've got an opportunity to take this space and just finish up for us, John.
So, Joanne, how I would finish is fairly simple. That when I look at the list of journal articles that are on the website, there's one that's written by Dr. Fiona Quinn and Dr. Penny Knoll. And really, you're talking about holding the hands of those who hold the hands of the children. That article really challenges organisations to think about how they can attend to the emotional well-being of the adults every day. And I would be confident that moving into 2021, and as we move into the space to deliver the promise, if we really are serious, let's attend to that, because those are the people who bring, and it's very twee to say it, but they bring the power of everyday care to life through relationships. So we really need to nurture and support those people, because if they can get that right, I'm absolutely confident that we will continue just to see that improvement that we're seeing year on year, because the care inspector will tell you that overall the quality of care in Scotland is on an upward trajectory. So my plea would be, and my takeout is, read what's there, watch what's there, and the beauty of it, you can watch it and when you're having your breakfast, you can watch it at night, you can read, you know, that's been a real gift, and thanks to everyone in CELCIS who's made that happen. And I know you'll come back to thank maybe a couple of key individuals, Joanne, but you know, that please take an opportunity to look after the people who are looking after the children.
I don't think I've got much more to say, John. I think that's a very good place to end. And yeah, just a special thanks to everyone. And without going through the list, because I'll miss someone and I don't want to do that, but I just want to say special thanks to Michelle and to Leslie, who have really worked behind the scenes. And we know all the other people who are front facing, who we are thanking from the bottom of our heart. But everybody needs a Michelle and a Leslie, don't they?
Absolutely. And I think usually at this time, Joanne, when there's usually our own credits of who to thank, but just to, it's been part of the committee just to thank you, Joanne, for your energy and your drive and making this happen.
Thank you. Thank you for walking this with me, John. Thank you so much. Take care.